President Biden focused on the economy in his second full day in office. He signed two more executive orders, the first centered on increasing federal food assistance. The second aims to help federal workers by improving collective bargaining power and protections. At the signing, Mr. Biden also argued for his new coronavirus aid package and swift action on more relief.
We're in a national emergency. We need to act like we're in a national emergency. So we've got to move with everything we've got, and we've got to do it together. I don't believe Democrats or Republicans are going hungry and losing jobs. I believe Americans are going hungry and losing their jobs.
For more on this, I want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns and Joe Minarik. Caitlin is our CBSN political reporter, and Joe is the Senior Vice President and Director of Research at the Committee for Economic Development. He also was the chief economist of the Office of Management and Budget during the Clinton administration. Welcome to both of you. Caitlin, let me start with you. Can you break down for us what was included in those executive orders that President Biden just signed?
That's right. Well, he said right now a lot of America is hurting. Families are going hungry. Job losses are mounting again. We need to act. We are in a state of national emergency. So reiterating that COVID is still front and center for this administration, and today they are addressing some of the economic impacts. Now, they've already introduced a COVID comprehensive legislative package, but they're trying to kind of hit the ground running with executive orders to address economic concerns right now. So some of those that he signed today include expanding access to food stamps, expanding food assistance. Food insecurity during this pandemic has been a monumental issue. He also extended some protections for workers. So if you get a job but aren't comfortable with the safety measures in place, for example, if you get a job and you are concerned that you are exposing yourself to COVID or there are risks involved, this would allow you to not have to take that job and still be able to collect unemployment benefits, speaking to security and safety concerns that a lot of people have with working during COVID. It would also lay the groundwork for a $15 minimum wage. That is part of the COVID package that will require legislative support. However, what they're trying to do today is to direct agencies to kind of get that process going, trying to evaluate how to get workers up to a $15 minimum wage. There are also additional protections for workers, expanding collective bargaining rights, for example. So today's executive orders are designed to address some of the more immediate economic impacts of COVID.
And Joe, I want to turn to you now. We also heard the president outlining a lot of what is in his big relief bill. There's a lot in it. It's ambitious. It's aiming to, bring 12 million Americans out of poverty, cut child poverty in half. He's addressing the housing crisis, food insecurity, student loans, so many things. Is it almost too ambitious? Does it almost include too many things that sort of guarantee Congress will not be able to agree on this?
Congress is going to have a problem agreeing on just about anything at this point. We are in a period of intense partisanship. There are some items in that package that will be of difficulty for Republicans to swallow. Some of them are possibly going to be a challenge to the Republicans to stay in line. An example is assistance to state and local governments who are laying off first responders and teachers. And there are probably some folks in states with Republican senators who are going to want to have that kind of relief for their localities and for their schools and for their police and for their firefighters. So one of the things that has protected the Republican side of the Senate up until this point has been their majority status and the ability of their majority leader to keep those bills from coming to a vote. Once we have a power sharing agreement and once the vice president is able to break a tie on the floor of the Senate, those kinds of provisions will come up for a vote, and they may, in fact, break through. There are some other items that may be a lot more difficult for Republicans to swallow. The big $1,400 additional payment. There are other items that are the minimum wage is a partisan hotspot. So it's going to be a contentious issue, and the president is going to have to make his choices about how he proceeds, where he cuts his losses, and where he cuts his deals.
So I want to ask you, as an economist, Joe, do you agree with the president's assessment of the current situation, which is that the economy desperately needs big, bold action right now?
This is an enormously uncertain situation. There is nothing in the living history of any American to compare it to. One of the issues that we have to deal with here is all of the business failures, mostly small businesses, mostly relatively low volume businesses, but we have businesses that held loans, had obligations to pay, and they weren't able to pay those obligations, and they had to close their doors. And there are more businesses in line. It's the dominoes lined up, and they're falling. And what the president is saying he has to do is to catch those dominoes before they continue to go to the point where they're all going down. Those kinds of business failures affect not just the people who work in those businesses, but also the people to whom those businesses owe money, including banks, including landlords. And the president is trying to find a way to stop that process such that when the economy recovers, when we have a solution to the pandemic, there will be businesses for workers to return to, and there'll be places for customers to go to get economic activity moving again.
And so does that mean, as an economist, you think his plan is on the right track?
The premise that the president has stated and others on the economic team have stated that there is more risk in going too low than in going too high in a stimulus package, I believe would be accepted by most economists. The president seems to be suggesting there's unanimity. We don't have unanimity among economists on just about anything, but a majority of economists would say if you spend too much in trying to get this very shaky economy stable, if the worst thing that happens is we get a little bit of inflation going, we know how to solve that problem. If instead we have massive business failures and weakness in financial institutions, that's something that would be much harder to fix. So it's a risky situation. The president is probably taking the less risky, but nonetheless still risky path out of where we are.
Thank you. I found that answer very, very informative. And Caitlin, how do today's executive orders that we just saw the president sign fit into his administration's larger plan? How does he break down what he can accomplish as an executive order and what he needs congressional approval to do?
Basically, what today's executive orders do is show what the president can do without the help of Congress, but it really does, the president really does need Congress to approve a lot of what he wants to accomplish. And that's why that COVID package is so important, because Congress will control funding, vaccine distribution, and a lot of the things that they want to get done. So this does raise a question of, whether the president can now put his deal-making skills to the test, skills that he has developed over 30 years in the Senate and when he was vice president, he often went to Capitol Hill to strike deals with Republicans on behalf of the Obama administration. That will be put to the test. This weekend, the president's economic advisor, Brian Deese, who you saw in a press conference earlier today, he will be meeting and talking with members of this bipartisan group in the Senate to talk about this legislative package. This is a group of about 16 senators, Republicans and Democrats, who have signaled that they want to work together to find legislative solutions. But the package as it stands right now doesn't seem to be getting anywhere in Congress. Even moderate Republicans like Mitt Romney, Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski have a big issue with the top line number, that $1.9 trillion package number, because they say, look, we already passed a $900 billion measure last December. So the price tag itself is an issue of contention in addition to some of the other measures like the $15 minimum wage. However, there are areas of potential agreement, and Republicans and Democrats agree about direct payments, for example. So that will be interesting to see whether this will be a big comprehensive package as it's introduced, or whether this will be kind of divided up into smaller bills. The White House says, look, this is not about the top line number. This is about the actual measures in this bill. So they are trying to focus less on that $1.9 trillion headline and more on the actual legislation that they believe needs to be passed in order to offer this relief.
And Joe, speaking of the economy, how would you contextualize the current situation we face? I mean, I've heard some people compare it to the Great Depression. Of course, we saw the Depression of 2008. How would you contextualize it in terms of the challenge that America faces right now? And do you think if a package as large as the Biden administration wants to pass does not go through, do you foresee a worsening crisis?
The topography of the economy right now is like nothing we've ever seen. You have the pandemic, which has selected a group of businesses where the essence of the business is interaction hand to hand between a business person and the customer. The business person and the customer can't get together because of the danger of the coronavirus. And because of that, you have a whole class of people who work in those kinds of businesses. And it's not that those businesses weren't sound. Even businesses that were highly successful before the pandemic struck can be adversely affected at this time. So taking that slice of the economy and hitting it so hard is really different from anything that we have experienced. And it is in the nature of those businesses where you have people working from in person, that the people who are losing their jobs tend to be people who earned relatively low incomes. Folks who are working with knowledge are able generally to work remotely, and they're doing fine. The economy, the Federal Reserve has been holding interest rates low, which means that if you have an income, you can buy a big house at a very low interest rate, and you're doing very well. Mm-hmm. So construction workers working outdoors, generally not as subject to the coronavirus, are able to do their work. So it's kind of random. You have this group of people who are hit very hard. They can't pay their rent. They can't pay their mortgages if they happen to own homes. Their businesses are suffering. The businesses can't pay their rent. They can't pay their loans. And you have the possibility of that segment of the economy falling over and taking other parts of the economy with it. So we really are at a stage where the question is, what risk do you want to take? There's nothing safe in this economy at this point. And what the president is trying to do, at the risk of a substantial increase in federal spending and therefore a substantial increase in the deficit and the accumulated debt, of trying to ensure that at the very least we do not have a collapsing of important segments of the economy. So he's making that choice. I think most economists, not all, but most economists would go along with him in that. And yes, there will be costs. There will be time after we get out of this mess where we're going to look at the federal debt and say we've got to do some painful things to try to control it. But at this point, we have to make our choices of which risks we want to cover. And the president is being pretty clear about what he wants to do. And I would say that most economists, not all, but most economists would probably agree with him.
It's interesting that every choice contains a risk, including the choice to not do anything or not do enough. All right. Well, Joe Minarik, thank you so much for your insight. Caitlin Huey-Burns, as always, thank you for yours. Thanks to both of you for joining us.